I need you to imagine this with me because I still can't quite believe it myself. Picture working yourself to the bone for years, pouring every ounce of skill and sanity you have into a company that barely acknowledges your existence. Then, the one day you finally pull off the biggest win in their history, you get a single email that simply says, "You're fired." No handshake. No thank you. No recognition. Just like that, deleted. That's what happened to me. My name doesn't matter yet, because for people like me, in places like the one I worked, names don't matter until they do. What matters is numbers, revenue, deals, profits. And that day, the number was 10 million. $10 million. dollars. I was the one who got it signed, who stayed awake across 3 time zones, who ate cold airport sandwiches and wore out my voice convincing reluctant executives on 3 continents to believe in our proposal. I did it. And before the ink was even dry, my boss cut me loose. I remember staring at the message on my phone in a haze. It was 2 a.m. I was in a hotel room with blackout curtains drawn, half a world away from home. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped the device. The man who had just congratulated me in front of the board 2 days earlier, who smiled with that practiced corporate smugness, had signed my termination papers, without even the courtesy of looking me in the eye. For a few minutes I just sat there, numb. Betrayal has a strange weight. It doesn't hit all at once. First, it's disbelief, then a kind of hollow silence. Only later does the fire ignite. But even in that silence, something inside me whispered, "This isn't the end," because he made one fatal mistake. Before I tell you what that was, let me pause for just a second. If you're hearing this story and it resonates, even a little, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Subscribe. Not because I want to play the algorithm, but because the twists in this story are unlike anything you've heard, and I promise you'll want to see where this ends. Okay, back to that night. I had always suspected my boss resented me. He loved results, but he hated when anyone else got credit for them. He was the kind of executive who thought leadership meant keeping people small so he could look large. In meetings, he'd cut me off mid-sentence, restating my points as if they were his own. On calls, he'd conveniently forget to include me when the clients offered praise. Still, I didn't expect him to take it this far. You might wonder why I didn't explode, why I didn't rage into the night or call him in fury. But here's the truth. I didn't need to, because I knew something he didn't. He thought he had clipped my wings by cutting me out of the company. What he failed to realize was that the very deal he was celebrating, the deal he believed made him untouchable, wasn't his at all. As I sat in that dim hotel room, phone screen glowing against the dark, the corner of my mouth twisted into something I hadn't felt in weeks, a smile. Because while he had just tried to end me, he hadn't checked one crucial detail. He hadn't checked the signature on the contract, and that signature was mine. To understand why that signature mattered, you need to know how the deal came together. Because this wasn't some quick win, some lucky pitch that fell into my lap. This was blood, sweat, and sleepless nights stretched across months, and my boss had nothing to do with it. It started almost a year earlier with a simple idea and a skeptical client. A European manufacturing consortium had been shopping around for a partner to help them modernize their infrastructure. Every firm in the industry wanted a piece of it. Their estimated budget? Somewhere between 8 and 12 million. Enough to make reputations, enough to break them too. I remember the first meeting, vividly. A boardroom in Munich, polished oak table, 6 executives sitting across from me with crossed arms and sharper eyes. They had heard every sales pitch imaginable. They didn't need more promises. They wanted someone who could convince them this wasn't just another corporate money pit. That was my job. I wasn't flashy, and I didn't come with the practiced showmanship of a CEO. What I had was something else. I listened. That first hour wasn't about pushing numbers or flaunting credentials. It was about hearing them out. Every complaint, every frustration with vendors who had overpromised and underdelivered. And then, when the silence finally came, I leaned in and told them quietly, I don't want to sell you a dream. I want to sell you trust. That was the moment the door cracked open. From there, it was a marathon. Long nights spent on calls adjusting proposals, mornings waking up in unfamiliar cities with nothing but coffee and adrenaline keeping me going. I flew between London, New York, and Tokyo so often that my passport started looking like a scrapbook. I memorized not just their technical requirements, but their personal quirks. I knew which director always wanted numbers in euros, which one preferred them in dollars. I remembered birthdays. I sent handwritten notes, little things that no boss in a corner office would ever think mattered. But they did. By month 3, I was their point of contact, not the company. Me. When they needed clarification, they called my cell. When they had concerns, they emailed me directly. And here's the truth my boss never grasped. Once trust shifts from an institution to a person, you can't reverse it with a title or a bigger office. Trust doesn't wear a suit and tie. It wears a name. And then came the final stretch. I was in Tokyo, barely functioning after 2 weeks of constant negotiations. We were one clause away from losing the entire contract. The lawyers wanted to delay for further review, but the client had already threatened to walk if we stalled. I remember standing in the corner of that glass tower conference room, pulse hammering in my ears, knowing the wrong sentence could blow the whole thing up. And then I said it. I told them, if you don't trust the contract, trust me. My name will be on the line beside yours. There was a pause, long enough for me to doubt myself. Then the lead delegate nodded slowly and said, then let your name be the one we shake hands with. That's why, when the deal was finalized, it wasn't my boss's name on the dotted line, it was mine. He had never been in the room. He had never stayed up at 3 a.m., rewriting clauses. He had never taken the risk of binding his reputation to theirs. I had. And in that single moment, I unknowingly built the very weapon he would later hand me when he thought he'd destroyed me. But back then, I didn't know any of this. Back then, I was still naive enough to believe loyalty would be rewarded, that if I worked hard enough, if I delivered something nobody else could, my company would finally see me as more than just a tool. I thought the board would congratulate me, the CEO would shake my hand, and my boss, maybe just maybe, would finally acknowledge my worth. Instead, 2 days later, he smiled across a polished table, toasted champagne glasses in my direction, and then, when my back was turned, sent an email that gutted me. But here's the thing. When you've built trust directly, when people see you as the deal, not the company behind you, contracts are more than paper. They're living, breathing promises, and I was the only one who could fulfill them. My boss didn't know that yet, but he was about to learn. So when he fired me, he thought he'd erased me from the equation. What he actually did was cut the company out of its own $10 million victory. And I was just starting to realize the full power of that mistake. The moment of my firing deserves its own chapter, because it wasn't just about losing a job. It was about watching arrogance blind a man so completely that he orchestrated his own downfall. It happened in the quietest, most impersonal way possible. No meeting, no phone call, not even a conversation with HR. Just an email that arrived at 2:30 in the morning, while I was still halfway between jet lag and exhaustion in a São Paulo hotel. The subject line, termination of employment. I remember blinking at it, certain I was hallucinating. I had just closed the biggest contract in company history, $10 million, a global partnership deal that would ripple across markets for years. 2 days earlier, my boss had been clapping me on the back in front of the board, bragging about our team's success. And now, here it was, one cold line after another. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. Access revoked? Do not return to company property? No thank you. No acknowledgement, just erasure. I sat on the edge of the bed, the glow of my laptop illuminating the dark room. My suitcase lay half-packed on the floor. A paper cup with stale coffee sat abandoned on the desk. I had been too tired to clean up the night before, and now the clutter looked like evidence of a life that had just been vacuumed out from under me. For a while, I didn't move. Shock is like a freezing wave. You don't thrash, you just sink. But then something flickered inside me. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was recognition. I knew my boss's style. He wanted me gone because he couldn't stand the idea that I was the face of this win. He couldn't risk me standing taller than him in front of the board. So he struck preemptively, hoping to erase me before the celebration turned into a threat. But arrogance breeds mistakes, and he'd made one I couldn't stop smiling about. I didn't reply to his email. I didn't beg, didn't threaten. I simply closed the laptop, pulled out my phone, and checked my messages. 3 missed calls, all from the same client delegate, at 2 a.m. That's when the realization landed. They weren't calling him. They weren't calling headquarters. They were calling me. Because my name, not his, was on the contract. For the next 2 days, I let the silence stretch. I ignored his attempts to frame the narrative, company-wide memos about restructuring, whispers about performance misalignment. He wanted to make it look like I'd been cut loose for legitimate reasons, but the clients weren't buying it. Neither were the people who'd worked alongside me for years. The cracks started showing almost immediately. The European partners demanded a progress update, and when he tried to reassure them, they responded with a single question. "Where's the person we signed with?" He had no answer. Meanwhile, I sat in my hotel room, phone buzzing nonstop, weighing my next move. I had every reason to be furious. I had given my health, my time, my life to this company. But fury wasn't useful. What was useful was the contract, my signature, my direct relationship with the people whose money was on the table. That's when anger crystallized into something sharper. Clarity. You see, revenge doesn't always come from plotting. Sometimes it comes from patience, from letting arrogance collapse under its own weight. And my boss, by firing me so recklessly, had just lit the match that would burn down his empire. Before I tell you how, let me pause again. If you've stuck with me this far, you already know this story isn't just about corporate betrayal. It's about power shifting in the most unexpected way. If you want to hear exactly how my boss's empire started crumbling piece by piece, make sure you subscribe, because the next part is where the downfall really begins. Now, let me take you into the exact moment I realized the deal wasn't his anymore. It was mine. The real turning point came the morning after I landed back home. Jet-lagged, running on black coffee, I opened my inbox to find 37 unread messages, not from my company, from the clients. Every subject line carried the same demand. We need to speak to the person who signed. That's when everything clicked into place. My boss had celebrated the $10 million deal as his crowning achievement, but he never noticed that his name wasn't on the paperwork. When the client insisted on one signature to anchor the agreement, I'd stepped up. I told them, "If you need a person to be accountable, I'll put my name on the line." They had nodded, satisfied, and the contract went forward. Now that decision was unraveling my boss's empire. Because when a multi-million-dollar consortium asks a question, they don't accept evasions. And every time my boss tried to assure them that the team was handling things, they shot back with the same line. "We didn't sign with your team. We signed with him." It was delicious irony. He had fired me to erase me, but in doing so, he had erased his own authority. The clients didn't care about his titles, his boardroom speeches, or his polished suits. They cared about the man who stayed up until 3 a.m., fixing clauses, who answered his phone on weekends, who remembered their children's names and anniversaries. Me. At first, I didn't respond. I wanted to see how long it would take for panic to set in. It didn't take long. By midweek, I started hearing from former colleagues. My boss had stormed through the office, demanding to know why the clients weren't listening to him. He blamed legal, then operations, then the account managers, everyone but himself. He even tried sending a new contract addendum without my name, but the clients flat out refused to acknowledge it. And then on Thursday morning, the phone call came that changed everything. It was the lead negotiator from Munich, the one who had looked me dead in the eye when I promised to stand behind the deal. His voice was calm but firm. "We're not comfortable continuing without you," he said. "The trust was with you, not the company. If you're no longer with them, we need to discuss our options." Options. That word lit up my mind like fireworks. Because in corporate language, options doesn't just mean renegotiation. It means leverage. It means power. It means the balance had shifted. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the skyline outside my apartment window. I could almost see the future unfolding. My boss thought he had stripped me of everything, but the truth was the opposite. He had handed me the keys to the kingdom. "You'll have my answer soon," I told the negotiator. When I hung up, I finally let out the laugh I'd been holding in for days. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't even vengeful. It was the laugh of someone realizing they'd been holding the winning card all along. By the end of that week, I had more than a dozen voicemails from executives asking me directly what my plans were. They weren't asking the company. They weren't asking my boss. They were asking me. And that's when I made my decision. I wouldn't go back. I wouldn't beg for my old position or try to claw my way into their good graces. Instead, I would do the one thing my boss never imagined. I would take the deal he thought was his and build something far bigger than he could ever control. He fired me thinking it was the end, but really it was the beginning of the end for him. And as for me, it was the beginning of freedom. When revenge finally begins to take shape, it doesn't always come with thunder or flames. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle. A shift so natural that the person who wronged you doesn't realize they're sinking until the water's already at their chin. That's exactly what happened to my boss. The clients made the first move. One by one, they began reaching out, not to him, not to the company, but to me. They wanted reassurance, they wanted continuity, and most importantly, they wanted me to guarantee that the promises I had made during those endless nights of negotiation would be honored. I had a choice to make. Ignore them and let the deal crumble, or step into the space my boss had so carelessly vacated. I chose the latter, not recklessly, not impulsively, strategically. I set up a small office, nothing fancy, just a rented workspace with good Wi-Fi and a clean desk. I registered an LLC under my own name. Then I drafted a single-page statement. Independent consultant, available to oversee client transitions and project delivery. I didn't poach. I didn't send out a campaign. I simply made myself available. And the response was immediate. Within a week, 3 major players from the consortium contacted me directly. "If you're willing to represent our interests," one of them said, "we'd prefer to move forward under your guidance." Another added, "We signed with your name, not theirs. As far as we're concerned, you are the deal." Meanwhile, back at the company, chaos was spreading like wildfire. The board was furious. The contract was supposed to be the CEO's legacy deal, the feather in his cap that would secure his position for years. Instead, it was unraveling in real time. The clients wouldn't speak to him. Revenue projections were collapsing, and whispers of a failed leadership shakeup began circulating in the industry. And the best part? I didn't have to lift a finger to sabotage him. His downfall was entirely self-inflicted. One former colleague, someone still trapped inside the crumbling fortress, called me late one night. His voice was hushed, like he was afraid the walls were listening. "He's losing it," he said, pacing the halls, screaming about betrayal. But no one betrayed him. He fired the only person the clients trusted, and now, well, now they're leaving with you. I didn't respond right away. I just sat there, phone warm against my ear, thinking about how ironic it all was. He had spent years trying to keep me small, and in the moment he thought he'd finally erased me, he made me bigger than he could ever be. By the end of the month, I wasn't just managing the original 10 miles deal. I was negotiating additional agreements with the same clients under my new entity. They wanted exclusivity. They wanted someone who wouldn't just disappear at the whim of a corporate ego. They wanted a partner, not a puppet. And I gave them exactly that. Money started flowing, more than I had ever earned under his shadow. Freedom, too. For the first time in years, I didn't dread Monday mornings. I didn't drag myself through airports, wondering if the grind was worth it. I was building something that was mine. As for my old boss, the industry is small and word travels fast. His reputation took a nosedive. Everyone heard how he'd fired the man who closed the 10-banner deal, only to watch that same deal walk out the door. Investors lost faith. The board called emergency meetings. His title became more fragile by the day. He thought he was untouchable. But arrogance isn't armor, it's glass, and I had just watched it shatter. If this story has you hooked, don't just listen. Make sure you subscribe, because the final part is the most satisfying of all. What happened to my boss wasn't just a downfall, it was justice. If you've stayed with me through this story, then you already know karma always collects its debts. And my boss, well, he built up quite a tab. By the time the second month rolled around, the cracks in his empire had become chasms. The clients weren't just ignoring him anymore. They were actively terminating contracts with the company. Every call, every negotiation, every update went through me. The $10 million deal he had claimed as his own, gone. Transferred to my new entity, signed and sealed with my name, the very name he had tried to erase. And it didn't stop there. Word spread fast in our industry. Competitors smelled blood in the water. Journalists started circling. Headlines appeared. Major deal collapses after internal shakeup, and CEO's decision costs firm millions. Inside the company, morale hit rock bottom. Talented employees began resigning in waves, some of them contacting me quietly, asking if I had space for them. A few weeks earlier, I was the one being discarded. Now I was the magnet everyone was gravitating toward. Meanwhile, my boss doubled down on his arrogance. He tried to spin the story as if I had betrayed the company. He called me disloyal. He accused me of manipulating clients. But none of it mattered, because the clients themselves refused to play along. One by one, they went on record saying the same thing. We signed with him, not with the company. Without him, the deal has no value. That was the final nail in his coffin. The board turned on him. Investors demanded accountability. In a desperate move, he tried to secure new deals, but no one wanted to touch him. Not after the public implosion. Not after the way he had treated the one person who actually delivered results. And then came the news I'd been waiting for. He was out, fired by the very board he once ruled over, escorted out of the same glass building where he had thought himself untouchable. No press release, no farewell party, just a quiet dismissal, the same cold silence he once used on me. I wish I could say I celebrated, that I opened a bottle of champagne or shouted in triumph. But the truth is, I didn't need to. His downfall wasn't my victory. It was his own doing. All I did was stand still while the weight of his arrogance crushed him. As for me, I kept building. The small office grew into a real headquarters. The team of 3 became a team of 20. The $10 million contract became 30. And every single client that left my old company knew one thing. I was the one who showed up, who kept promises, who put my own name on the line. So yes, my boss fired me after I closed a $10 million deal. He thought he was cutting me down. What he didn't realize was that he was cutting himself out of the future. And if you're wondering how it feels to watch someone who tried to bury you fall into the grave they dug themselves, let me tell you, it feels like freedom. This isn't just a story about betrayal or revenge. It's about power, where it really lives. Not in titles, not in corner offices. Power lives in trust. And once people trust you, no one, not even a boss drunk on his own ego, can take that away. So the next time someone tries to erase you, remember my story. Remember that sometimes being fired isn't the end. Sometimes it's the beginning.